Welcome to Negotiating Ideas, a podcast about political thought on democracy and pluralism. I am Omar Sadr, and today we are diving deep into a remarkable story that spans nearly a century of Central Asian history through intimate lens of one man's journal. My guest today is Dahlia Abraham-Klein, author of The Stateless Central Asian Merchant, The Life of Haim Ibrahim, based on his journal 1897-1986. This isn't just a biography, it's an extraordinary account of Dahlia's own grandfather, a Bukharan Persian Jews merchant who meticulously documented his life across 9 decades of dramatic historical change. Imagine a world where borders shifted like a sand dune, where being stateless wasn't just a legal technicality, but a lived reality that shaped every business deal, every journey, and every decision about where to call home. Aghajan Ibrahim navigated this world, traveling ancient routes within Central Asia, witnessing the rise of new nations, all while maintaining cultural traditions and commercial networks that had sustained Bukharan Persian Jews communities for centuries. From the twilight of Russian Empire to Soviet imperialism and beyond, Ibrahim's journal offers as a rare window into the lives of Persian-speaking Jews merchants who formed the backbone of trade across some of these world's most contested regions. His story intersects with great migrations of 20th century, refugees fleeing Soviet collectivization, communities shattered by war and revolution, and gradual disappearance of Jews' life from places like Mashhad in Iran, Herat and Khui, Balkh and Kabul in Afghanistan, where it had flourished for generations. Today, through his granddaughter's careful storytelling, we're exploring what it meant to be a stateless merchant in the world being rapidly reshaped by nationalisms and borders, and how one man's meticulously record-keeping has preserved an entire world that might otherwise have been lost to history. Dahlia, welcome to Negotiating Ideas, and thanks for accepting my invitation.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Let me ask you first, this is really personal thing for you. How initially you drew to your grandfather's story, and how did you discover his journal that spans almost 100 years, 1 century?
I kind of like rear-ended into it. My grandfather passed away in 1999, and I needed a place to live with my son. And my grandfather passed away just at that time. I asked my parents if I could move into his apartment. They said yes. He was living in Forest Hills, New York. And as we moved into the apartment and started to clean out the apartment, we found the journal. The journal was a very nondescript journal, and it was written in the language I couldn't read. It was written with Rashi script, which is an ancient Jewish script from the 15th century, which is very customary for the script that the Jews used in Central Asia, the Persians, the Bukharians, the Afghans, and in Judeo-Farsi. So we found this journal, and my mother sent it to a translator in Israel because there's only a handful of people that can translate that combination. Eventually, and this is 1999, so now we're in the year 2000, and I decided to write my mother's life story into a book called Caravan of Hope.
Which is the book before this.
Yes, which is the book, which is her experience as an Afghan woman growing up in Afghanistan, which is very different than a man's experience growing up in Afghanistan.
Definitely.
So she was born in 1933 in a Soviet Uzbek prison, and then eventually she is raised in Kabul. So her life story. Now, when I wanted to flesh out her story, and this book was published in 2023, as I was researching her story, I said, out of curiosity, let me look at my grandfather's journal that got translated into Hebrew. So it got translated into Hebrew. Nobody read his journal for 20 years.
Okay.
Just knew it was something to translate, but nobody bothered to read it.
Uh-huh.
For 20 years, it's sitting on a flash drive. And I don't even know how I even managed to get on my computer because I don't even have a USB port anymore. We don't even have it anymore. But in any event, I opens it up and I started to read the Hebrew here and there because I can read Hebrew, but not fluently, but I can read enough because I was trying to get context to her life story because my mother is my grandfather's niece. In other words, both my grandfathers are brothers.
Sure.
So I was looking for context to flesh out her story, and I wrote her story more as a novel
Uh-huh.
than a biography. I wrote it more as a novel. As I'm researching and I'm reading through the journal, I am in shock. I really am in shock. And I said, immediately I knew this book had to be published, that this journal had to be published. I immediately knew that as I started to understand what he was talking about in the journals. Just, first of all, just a small thing. I had no idea that my grandfather was born in Marv, Russian Turkestan. I had no idea my father was born in Marv, Russian Turkestan. I had no idea because all along it said in the passport, which we'll discuss later, that he was born in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And my father
Yeah.
and my mother.
Yeah. The birthplace of written Herat.
Yes. So I had no idea. And that was just like one thing. I was just like, first of all, I had to go look up Marv. Where is Marv? And funny enough, my husband's name is Merv, MERV.
Wow.
And no one ever said to me or my husband, oh, by the way, that's where we're from.
Sure.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. In Persian, in Afghanistan and Iran, probably, and Central Asia, we have a particular carpet which is hand waved and marv, and it's called marvi. So it's very common, this surname and this title. But I must also ask, apart from this, what other thing really moved you and inspired you when you read your father's history?
My grandfather's.
Grandfather's
My
story.
grandfather's story. And I just want to add, when you said Persian and Bukharian, I just want to add that I was raised not as Persian, I was raised as Afghan Bukharian.
There is.
So the identity was more identified with the category of Afghan Bukharian. And I'll preface Afghan first. That was how I was raised. So I just wanted to clarify that first.
Sure. But here, one thing, in Afghanistan also, we have a category of people who are Persians, and they are Eastern Persians. And they speak Farsi, which is Farsi is lingua franca across ethnic groups. But apart from that, the Tajiks, which are Eastern Iranian, and they are a branch of Persians, and Afghanistan and Tajikistan and Central Asia, Samarkand, Bukhara, they're all Persians in that way.
You see, essentially, what I think I might have mentioned, or actually I didn't mention yet, I did my DNA test and it showed up 70% Persian.
Okay.
It did show up 70% Persian, but I never grew up with that identity.
In that case, you're more Persian than me because my DNA doesn't show that much.
70%. But the other percentages, what was interesting is the other percentages showed the traveling route and the exile from Israel, which was then called the land of Canaan. That's what it was called. And it shows basically the travel route, how he ended up in the greater Persian Empire.
Got you.
But aside, to answer your first question, because I just wanted to clarify the Afghan part,
But
even though, yes, it's true Persian, but I think the which we can get to a little bit later is the Jewish triangle touched upon all of these communities.
yeah.
What moved me is there were so many things. I mean, what moved me as far as everything in the journal moved me because I knew my grandfather. He passed away when I was 29, 30 years old.
Sure.
Everything, and I knew him. Everything in that journal, I didn't know. So that already was like a big mystery. I'll go further to say I don't even think my father knew. that was the part that was jaw-dropping. And then when I started to share what was in the journal with my family, they almost didn't believe it
Wow.
because it was so incredulous. And he was a very reserved man.
Got you.
He was a very reserved man. So as far as what moved me, I mean, the broad brushstrokes, how much turmoil there was in the early part of the 20th century,
Yeah.
and his will and conviction, which, by the way, my mother had it as well in Afghanistan, to move forward.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And now paint as a picture of a stateless, as you describe it, Jews merchant in Central Asia and that turbulent time. What does it mean to be that kind of person?
Stateless.
A stateless Bukharan Jews.
So,
in Central Asia.
like logistically, at that time, he doesn't have a nationality, but within the Jewish community, he does.
Sure.
He's considered an Afghan Jew
That's right.
within the Jewish community, not a Persian Jew. He's considered an Afghan Jew.
Sure.
In the journal, he does. So the statelessness, he didn't rely on the government, I suppose, to grant him nationality. They had their own groups, the Jews, amongst themselves. The three major groups were the Afghans, the Bukharians, the Persians.
Sure.
I think the fact that they were Jewish and in these communities gave them a sense of state.
Sure.
Because they ended up relying on each other. So it created trust, trade, ingenuity, community.
Right.
And the bigger message in that is how we survived.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the bigger message. And I say this in a very broad way, to rely on your community, to rely on your family,
That's
and
right.
have so many trade networks. At the end of the day, that is how we survive. And that he was never alone. The other thing I can share also is that when the statelessness and this, it's interesting in the journal, when I started to read it, he kept on saying in the Hebrew, we and our.
Yeah.
He didn't identify himself in the individual. I thought initially it was grammatical.
Yeah.
So when I translated it originally, I originally translated to I or me until I understood where he was coming from, which is that he never identified himself as a me or an I, because this mutual responsibility is a we in good and in bad. And there is, me and I think also for him, knowing how he was, I think there's something that might be a little bit disrespectful. Even though the journal was not meant to be read, it was like disrespectful for himself.
Yeah.
We, it's like there's a humility there.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
That's right. That's right.
There's humility there.
That's right. This sense of being rooted in community and tradition, and in that sense of resilience, solidarity, it's definitely not new to our time, and it has a story long back. And what is new in our time is that a state as an institution has become quite overwhelming now, in a sense that now the communication and relation between individual as a citizen now and the state is quite direct. But in the early 20th century, when all of these states were young, and they were just giving birth to. But out of colonialism, Afghanistan was carved out. Iran's borders were formed. Soviet Union came in. So it was something quite new to mark the people with passports, with identification numbers. In Afghanistan, even till mid 20th century, so many of these suburban peoples and communities didn't have that direct communication with the state. Anyway, so but you do a very good thing while discovering this story of your grandfather. You put it in a political context. You add a background,
Historical context.
and that helps the readers
Yes.
to connect between a very individual or a
Yes.
family story or a community story with what's going on around in the region. It's not detached from the rest of the region or or whatever is going on, and that's good. So tell us about how made you and how much effort did you put in that research?
That was the research. That was the research. So what I decided to do is, if I'm going to publish anything, and this is just a rule for me because this is my 5th book, I need to give you a reason to pick up the book and read it. I need to give you a reason. What do I have to offer you? And I need to make it in a way that is compelling. Just producing the journal and publishing the journal would not make sense. It would be a piece just for the family, maybe for Afghans that are interested. To put the extra layer, which took a lot of research, and that was the research of historical context, I think added a lot of the richness to his life. So the first thing that I did is I said, let me put it in black and white. Let me make a timeline.
Mm.
So the beginning of the book, there's a timeline. So because there was so much upheaval in such a short amount of time, World War I, World War II,
Yeah.
the Bolsheviks, the Russian Revolution, there's so much going on. And the political divides are changing year to year. It can be confusing.
Yeah.
So a lot of the research was putting a timeline together and then adding the historical context to his journal entry so people understand, why is he leaving Marv?
Yeah.
Why is he in Samarkand? Like I said, he's not writing the journal for anyone to read. He's writing the journal for himself.
Yeah.
So it's important for the reader to understand where he's coming from and to make him human.
I think the Central Asian Jews are also distinct in terms of their tradition and culture.
That's specific to the holiday of Passover, that we act out the parts of the slave and being whipped by the masters. And it really is kind of with scallions, that's what you're referring to. And that's really kind of a show,
Sure.
really for the children, so that the story carries from generation to generation. So it kind of like gets acted out. One of the things that's exclusive to Central Asians, Bukharians, Persians, is that on the Jewish holidays, we wear something called a joma.
German, yeah.
A joma, which is a silk brocade robe.
That's right.
And that puts us in a celebratory, wearing that is celebratory. And we wear it also at weddings, at, any kind of Jewish sacred event. That also separates us, I would say, that we're very colorful. But there's some other like North African Jews that had their own version of that. I think the point is that because it's a special day, so we wear special garments.
That's right. The word jama is also connected with what we in English we call pajama. Pajama is
Oh, interesting.
Yes, palm means and Farsi means leg, foot. So it's a kind of jama which you wear it starting from the foot, from the leg.
Oh, so this was a robe.
I know it's a kind of we
Yes.
have this still in Afghanistan and Central Asia, which is silky and very special. Anyway, so now the Bukharan Jews moved to Afghanistan, but initially some of them, including the family of your grandfather, moved from Mashhad. So there's a history behind this. Why they leave Mashhad, Iran, and they move to Mar, and then they move to Samarkand, and from there on continue. So tell us about this, the movement of the people. Part of it is forced one, that people are forced to convert, and that's why they are leaving there, coming to Herat, part of it going to Marib. And still there is category of people in Iran who are Muslims now, but they trace their genealogy to the Jews who are forced to convert.
Mm-hmm.
So if you
So my grandfather doesn't speak about his history of how, he doesn't even say in the journal that we were originally Persian. He doesn't go there, but I had to do research. And from the research I discovered, which was the big shock for me, I'm in fact Persian. Was a big shock for me. Because like I said, I grew up as an Afghan Bukharian. He doesn't state it in the journal, but the way that it worked is that one side of the family came from Yaz in Iran, moved to, in the 1700s, moved to Mashhad, and from Mashhad in 1839, there was a type of pogrom forcing Jews to convert. And so one part of my family, one section, because there's 4 sets of great-grandparents. There's so many sets of great-grandparents. One set came in the 1700s to Herat.
Okay.
And then another set came to Herat in the mid-1800s. And then they left Herat. That's why they considered themselves Afghans.
Okay.
They left Herat because the Persians conquested Herat.
Under Qajar, yes.
Yes. So they went to Marv. And Marv at that time had the Trans-Caspian Railway. So Jews, being merchants, that's where a merchant class of Jews went to where the railway was. And that's how we ended up in Marv. That's how the family ended up in. But I had to do a lot of tracing to figure out, why did we leave Afghanistan? And that's what was so puzzling to me. How am I an Afghan Jew if my father was born in Marv, my grandfather was born in Marv, until I understood that they originally were in Afghanistan.
And then in Central Asia, moving on, during 1920s and 30s, so there's a famine, but at the same time, the efforts, the shift of policy from Lenin to Stalin and collectivization, they also categorize, as you describe in the book, the Jews in 3 categories: those who are local, and those who are Persian, and those who are coming from other places. So how is that happening? And then that forces people to come to northern Afghanistan. So there's an influx of immigration to northern Afghanistan. That includes Jews, but also Tajiks, Turkmens, Uzbeks also immigrate to Afghanistan. So in that history, does your grandfather journal, how does it reflect this part of history? And does he personally help other communities of Jews to also escape for survival to Afghanistan?
He does write about an incident in the journal. He does write about an incident where I actually would, he did write about it in the journal, that he helped the Bukharian Jews that moved to Afghanistan, and they had a relationship with the police. I also get a sense in the journal that my family had a good relationship with the upper echelons of Afghanistan.
Okay. The royal family and the ministers?
My great uncle, my grandfather's brother, Shimon, which was known as Saban in his Muslim name, I guess, he had a good relationship with the royal family. But they had relationships with the ministers, with the police.
Sure.
Which is how eventually they probably attained citizenship. But there is an incident that my grandfather described in the journal, that the police arrested a Bukharian that they knew from Samarkand. and they beat him. And my great-grandfather came and vouched for him and said, beat me instead. Don't do that, and he had that much clout with the police.
Yeah.
Another incident where there was a great amount of trust that the Afghans had with my grandfather. They knew that he spoke Russian,
Yeah.
and they didn't use that against him.
Yeah. That's right. While at this time there was so much suspicion that the immigrants from Central Asia should be surveilled and controlled.
Yes. They didn't use that against him. In fact, because there was trust.
Mm.
And I think my grandfather and his family earned their trust with the ministers in Afghanistan, because my grandfather speaks of the journal that he was even offered a position in with a minister or with customs in a position. They gave him a very high position. Someone very famous, actually.
In 1930s, there was a famous merchant who turned to become Minister of Finance, Majid Zabuli. He was in Russia and he spoke fluently Russian. He had investments in Marv and Bukhara probably. And therein, your grandfather met with Zabuli and they formed a bond and something like that.
Right. That's what I'm saying. There was, generally a positive and warm relationship. And they used it to help whoever Jews that they were connected to. They used it to help them.
They
used them to help them.
So
yes, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to refer back to the police, but I already shared that.
Now, in that context, so the next question that I have is, what role did Afghanistan play to your grandfather's merchant network? Beyond this cordial or friendship that he developed with some of the higher echelons on those in the government, but I mean, as a political entity, as a social, cultural environment, Herat, Kabul, that he moved to Kabul, how that empowered him in terms of his trade networks and relations beyond Central Asia?
How did the Afghans help him beyond that?
Afghanistan and yeah.
So from what I understand, in Afghanistan, it was very tribal, and in those tribal areas, only Jews could go there.
Mm.
And so, because they were not subject to those tribes, so the Jews could go there and they could be merchants there.
Mm.
Every opportunity there was to maneuver, he maneuvered. That was in Afghanistan. As far as I don't know if I can answer that fully.
But he went on from there to Peshawar, for instance, which was on the kind of, it was not exactly a Persianate city, but it had that connection with Kabul in terms of trade. So, and then moving on to Mumbai also, the trade network between Mumbai, Japan, Peshawar, and Kabul, that your great-grandfather or grandfather connected all of these. And for example, importing
Yes.
fabrics from Japan to Mumbai and from Mumbai to Afghanistan. So this network was eventually created when he came to Afghanistan, and from Afghanistan he was able to move on to South Asia and develop all that network.
I think that's actually very unique, and I spoke to a few scholars about that, and they said that was one of the unique things about my family's experience, is that he was importing from Japan and also importing tea to Kabul. I think that opened the door for him to eventually move out of Central Asia.
Yeah.
That's what happened, and I think that's where he was a pioneer.
That's right.
And I'll say my entire family, because my grandfather moved to Tokyo. My other grandfather moved to Hong Kong. My great uncle Shimon, the one that I said was Saban, that was with the royal family, moved to Hong Kong as well.
Okay.
My family just they were pioneers in that way, because they were a big family. They relied on each other. and each family member became stationed in a country. And so they captured at that time in this 60s, 70s, 80s, they captured the entire gem, pearl, jewelry business because they were stationed, and what was unusual about them is that they were not afraid to pick up and move and live somewhere foreign.
Yeah.
Foreign was comfortable.
Right. Right.
It was comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And then probably if I ask you the last question, in terms of what the status of Jews now in Central Asia, and particularly with Afghanistan that you identify with your heritage with, what does your great grandfather's documentation tell us about end of that 100 years that he was present in Central Asia, and now we have this community that completely disappeared in Afghanistan. The last remaining Jews of Afghanistan left when the Taliban took over almost 4 years ago, and that's really painful for a country which had this rich,
Vibrant.
vibrant, pluralistic history and medieval era, but now the community is lost. So, how do you reflect on that?
The true homeland for Jews in this area was always Israel.
Mm.
That's the true homeland. I can just to back up a little bit to share more context to that.
Sure.
Is that we were expelled out of what was the land of Israel. At the time, it was called the land of Canaan in 586 BCE. It was called the Babylonian exile. Where did we end up? We ended up in the greater Persian Empire.
Yeah.
We had an opportunity under King Cyrus to go back to the land of Israel and rebuild the Second Temple.
Yeah.
Most Jews did not go back because we became comfortable. So I think what happened is there was this unconscious feeling of, and then being there thousands of years, they understood, and I'm surmising, because there was a very strong attachment to the land of Israel even before its independence in 1948. My family was already going and visiting and making the pilgrimage to Jerusalem in the late 19th century. At least my grandfather records it, perhaps even before. But what I'm trying to say is that they knew that when Israel gained its independence and that we were allowed to move back,
Yeah.
that we better go. We don't want to miss that opportunity again.
Mm.
So in the Caravan of Hope, which was my mother's life story, my mother's bus was the first bus out of Afghanistan to move to Israel.
Mm.
So that's why I share that with you, just to put some context.
Sure.
That they left because they understood that our real homeland is really in the land of Israel. And that's where we were expelled from. And now we have an opportunity to go back. That's where it came from. So I just want to put some context.
Definitely. Yeah.
But like I said, there was always a warm relationship with the Afghans. And when I was growing up in New York, there were people that my grandfather spoke about in the journal, one of the ministers that came to visit us. And my family was doing business with Afghanistan up until until it stopped.
Yeah.
My family was the Goodyear tire.
Importing from Japan.
Yes. So there was a relationship there up until there could be a relationship. They wanted to continue the relationship, but at some point it dried up.
Do you have the exact date? When was it? After the communist revolution in Afghanistan or somewhere in 1970s?
I would say it most likely was probably up until 1979.
29.
That's what I would imagine, that it was up until 1979 with the revolution when the Jews left
Sure.
Persia.
And what happened with the family property in Kabul and the investment that they had? No one knows about those. Unclear.
No, it's about
And the journal also doesn't reflect on that.
no, and it which just goes to show that I think he let the past, in some ways, whatever was lost, he didn't lament. And for me, that's also a message. Okay, you know, do you want to live your life bitter? Because the message is, and you don't get a sense in the journal that he was bitter. You don't get a sense that he was a victim.
Right.
Someone else from today's times might look at it and define it as resilient. He was a victim. He wouldn't see himself that way at all.
Interesting, yes.
At
Important point. That's important.
He would not see, because this is more of, because that point means it's about me. And in his journal, it's not about me. It's about the hour. And the only way to move forward is to pick yourself up and move. Okay, this was a part of life. And I think I also came to understand, to put this full circle, is why he ended up moving to Japan.
Mm.
You know, yes, it was business, but at the end of his life, he wants to go back to Japan.
Okay.
And I understood from the journal his life and all of the upheavals that he had. What was Japan offering him? As funny as it is, even though he was a foreigner in Japan, being foreign in my family is comfortable. It's comfortable because it's just the way that it is. He liked the order.
Sure.
You know, living through a period with so much disorder, so much unpredictability, and he moved post-war, Japan. Japan offered a lot of order and conformity that he liked and appreciated,
Mm.
which is why it suited him to live in Japan. And I came to understand why he wanted to live there.
Did you personally had an opportunity to travel around with him anywhere or not?
Me personally,
Yeah.
I did visit him in Japan.
You visited him in Japan?
I did visit him in Japan. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did. Me personally, that was the only place. But I had a relationship with him because he passed away 29, 30 years old. And I can tell you that, and he had a lot of grandchildren. We're over 20 grandchildren. None of us knew this, which was so odd.
Yeah.
And so I think he wrote it. He only wrote his life story at 90 years old, which is kind of incredible to have that kind of memory at 90 years old. It's pretty incredible.
It's incredible.
The amount of detail, even with the dates, some were off
Right.
by a few years. It's okay, but just the amount of detail. That was the other thing I think that I wanted to show people that are reading the journal. He wrote this life story at 90 years old with that much detail, with such clarity.
Sure.
I think and I'm very proud.
That's right. You have to be proud. Yeah. When I spoke about Kabul because Herat was a hub for the Jews. Over around, if I'm not wrong, 3,000 Jews were living in Herat. Compared to that, in Kabul, it was not that huge number. And so that's why in Herat, there was a called Mahalle Kalimi Yahudan. Mahalla means that
The name of the neighborhood of the area.
there was a neighborhood for
Yes.
it. But in Kabul, there wasn't a neighborhood exclusive of the Jews. So they were this merchant class and they were living along with other people next door. That's why I asked, how is it?
From my understanding, the way that my mother shared it with me, she said Herat was way backwards than Kabul, and they were pushed into Kabul. There was a riot that broke out. That's the reason why they pushed into Kabul. There was a riot that broke out between a Muslim boy and a Jewish boy. A riot broke out, and the whole community basically left Herat and moved into Kabul.
All right. All right. Okay, so what is the last message if you want to leave the audience and me with reading the history of your grandfather?
For today's times, that political upheavals were not in the background, were in the background of his life. They were not in the forefront. It was just what we would define as resilient is not something that he would define himself. It just was the reliance on the the Jews in the Jewish triangle and the trade networks was their survival. And I think the bigger message there is to have a community. You don't survive alone. And we see it, you don't survive alone. This individualistic. I also think in an ironic way, I think one of the reasons why the Muslims that had a relationship with my family respected my family, aside from being trustworthy in business, I think that they respected each group, the Muslims and the Jews respected, I'm Jewish and I keep my Jewish rituals. You're Muslim, you keep your Muslim rituals. And there was a mutual respect there. And I think they respected us more in a way because we were on the same page because we're both devoutly religious people.
Sure, that's right. There's a proverb in Farsi which echoes what you just said. It says, "Isa wa din khud, Musa wa din khud." And Isa is the prophet, and Moses and Jesus. So to each of them their own religion.
Yeah.
It really echoes how that sense of respect for each one has been to not impose your own morality, your own religion.
They
your own
respected
thought.
each other. And I think the message in that is that they didn't water themselves down. I think that people respect you more when you're holding on to your values. And I think that's the other reason why I think that there was a good relationship. Because when you water yourself down, you lose your internal boundaries. People don't respect you.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think that's also a bigger message. Hold yourself high. They respected that, at least in my family, they held themselves to very high ethical values. And they respected that. And that's something also to be proud of. Don't water yourself down to fit in.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful. And for a country like Afghanistan, which has been victim and at the same time center of religious extremism, unfortunately, which is ruled now by a very bigot conservative group, reading your grandfather's history tells that how this country was in early 20th century and the way people were coming along, doing trade, doing relationship, business, forming networks, trusting each other.
Yes.
That really tells us and narrates us a different history of that nation and that
Right.
country.
Especially today, because Americans don't know that.
That's right. Yes.
And so we need to share that to show this is what was.
Yeah.
And
it also it should inspire us. At this moment that there's so much division and there's so much mistrust, politically or otherwise, living peacefully together requires trust, requires understanding, relationship, bonds, and that should be respected. That should be valuable for us. And then you say something good. Community is important. For many of us who are like America is multinational country, and people are coming from wherever. Like your family, you quote your father and grandfather that it was land of opportunity even back then in 1950 for him. And so it's multi-generation. We had the same, but we have to rely on communities and
I'll add something else to that too. When any place that my family went to, every country, including America, and they were essentially immigrants, basically, wherever they went, they rolled up their sleeves to not only help the community, but they rolled up their sleeves and they said, how do we make this better?
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
How do we make it better? They didn't come as observers.
Yes.
They
formed relations with the people and they relied on the people and vice versa.
Yes, it was not, we're victims. We're here also to elevate. That's a very important message. And it shows because they appreciated America and the opportunities that it had and wherever they were. I mean, my father, my mother, they said one of the best years they had in their lives was living in Bombay. They loved it. It was one of their best years that they describe in their lifetime. So that's the message that I'd like to get across.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was so nice talking with you.
Yeah, more thank you.
I really enjoyed reading the book. Thank you for writing that and discovering that. It was really a pleasure to record this episode with Dahlia. Thanks to our listeners for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoyed listening to us, and I hope you will pick the book and read it, The Stateless Merchant of Central Asia. Please subscribe to this podcast and make sure to share it with your circle of friends on social media. Looking forward to talking to you on the next episode.